To start out. And then I'll just introduce myself. My name is Lee Bronis. I am the National Sales Manager for our company's practice of what's known as Sprint Professional Mobility. And about 18 months ago, Sprint decided to kind of take our blinders off of just connecting devices to our network, because as sales teams, you know, that's what we were focused on doing, right, is activating devices on the network, and realized that there was a growing need to address just a need in the marketplace of helping organizations, enterprises, public sector agencies to address some really unique situations that were coming with a lot of different circumstances at hand. So 18 months ago, they pulled a small team that I led and worked with a lot of folks at product marketing, and what we decided to do is basically build a three-legged stool. One leg of that stool is what we reference as mobility management services. And at a high level, just from a platform, helping companies and public sector organizations manage holistically a program of mobile devices and mobile services. And we'll get into what some of those are later on. The second leg of the stool, and by the way, we chose to, instead of white label it or build it on our own, we chose to do that with best-in-class providers that were already in the marketplace. And the reason being is most enterprises and most agencies of states and municipalities are multi-carrier. And it just didn't make sense for Sprint to manage agnostically other carriers' devices. So we built that program to leverage third parties, but bundle it under Sprint for easy contracting vehicle. And plus, our sales teams needed to get out there and talk to our customers and prospects about it. The second leg of the stool is mobile device management. So, you know, actual software client licenses on the device itself. So we partnered with companies like AirWatch and ZenPrice. And then the third leg of the stool is what we're here to talk about today, and really combine it with mobile device management and security, and that's BYOD. So, today's presentation is really securing the devices that connect across carriers, across the mobile networks, in a BYOD world. And I'll change the slide. Well, I'm going to start with a statement that is rather probably obvious to all, and that is mobility is vital to today's business. So the first few slides, we're going to really talk about, what are these forces that are kind of coming together to really produce this dilemma or challenge around managing mobility, and in particular the BYOD dilemma. And part of it is, everybody's using mobility. I mean, in your own organizations that you lead and manage, you probably have most, if not, well over half of your users using smartphones. Business, if you look at legacy, it wasn't always that way. Messaging and basic cell phone service, but now it's all about smart devices. And then we're seeing this explosion of tablets. 88% of the Fortune 500 companies plan to implement tablets. So it's happening in business. A couple slides here, you'll see just the growing trend of tablets across the consumer and business. But it's really those two devices, if you think about it, the internet, the connectivity of the internet has happened what? Through laptops and PCs? Not anymore. I mean, tablets and mobile devices is where people are connecting to the internet, and that's a phenomenon that's growing. And then the whole mobile business applications. Enterprise application platforms have existed a long time, but now you've got this mobile application world that's growing and increasing by 50% per year. So again, another force that's out there coming together. And of course, the mobility benefit really drives productivity. It's that flexibility of your employees to be able to be in contact with the organization's needs. It's their responsiveness. And of course, it all produces productivity. And that's what this is really about, is mobility is vital to today's business. The next slide, as I mentioned about smart devices, is really a graph that depicts, this is the NPD group, consumer tracking, and it's really a point in time. So right now, as they do their studies and they look across the carriers, you can see that all carriers' new devices that are being shipped out of inventory, the vast majority, the old 80-20 rule, is coming out of smart devices. In Sprint, obviously with our unlimited data, it lends itself to a very high take rate of smartphones. So in our stores, in our inventory where we ship to businesses, we're seeing over 83% of the devices that we ship are smart devices. And tablets. This is in millions, folks. And the two shades there, and I am colorblind, so I assume they're green, is that right? Okay, I would say brown, but the two shades there, one was the original forecasting, and the forecasting was so low that Forrester actually had to recalibrate. That's how fast tablet usage across, not just business, but this is consumer, but it is U.S. tablet sales projections. How many of y'all have tablets? Don't be embarrassed if you don't have one. I don't, but okay. It's really a growing trend, and we're going to talk about later how BYOD kind of plays into this. So just planting the seed there that the tablet usage is really growing as well as the smartphones. And then the other force that's kind of in the wind blowing is the rise of Android and Apple or iOS operating systems. This chart here, and I am, by the way, a proud RIM carrying, so if BlackBerry reps are here, I do carry a RIM phone, because I grew up in the corporate world. And many of you in your organizations probably remember that safe, secure, corporate liable device that ruled the world was BlackBerry. Corporate email, security, the BES server, it truly was a business-like device that was cherished, especially by those who had principles around security. And how many of you in your groups and your organizations and agencies today still have members of your teams that are carrying BlackBerries? Okay, still a good percentage. Now this graph depicts how today's rise of operating systems with the Android and the iOS, the sales that are made today of the smart devices, look at that growth. And before 2011, BlackBerry was already finding those challenges, right? Now, there's a launch of a new BlackBerry device. We don't know yet the impact that that's going to have, but talking and having friends that work with RIM, I mean, it's really, they're trying to secure their base right now, right? I mean, candidly, the rise of the Android and the iOS system, it's beyond a tipping point. So just want everybody to realize now, why is that important? Because Android and iOS were originally designed as consumer devices. You know, they don't have that inherent security that the BlackBerry BES environment did. So again, this is that force at hand right now that's making all of the people in this room and other enterprise IT directors and folks that have to manage mobility for their organizations have to kind of sit back and say, wow, this is a different environment than what we used to have. All right, now bringing it back to BYOD. As I said, if you look right now at trends, and I'm trying to use statistics for you to, state the obvious, but back it up. Cisco study, 95% of business organizations permit some use of employee-owned devices. Now, that's not saying 95% of employees have devices that are connected, but it's saying 95% of the businesses surveyed in some way, shape, or form allowed employee-owned devices to connect to the enterprise. Now, this is one that I'm going to ask a little group participation. Average number of worker in 2012 had, and this is knowledge worker, so we're not talking about production worker, but knowledge worker in organizations surveyed, 2.8 connected devices. Who has 2.8 connected devices to your organization? Or let's round it off to 3, because they say by 2014 it'll be 3 devices. Who has more than 3, or 3 or more? Don't be shy, okay? Because when I first thought that, I was like, wait a minute. But then I said, well, I've got a laptop with a mobile broadband card, right? I'm a 2-phone carrying guy, so I've got 2 phones. I'm 3, I qualify. A lot of people have tablets. How many of you have tablets that actually connect to the enterprise? Okay? All right, so you can see it is a growing trend, and with BYOD and that growing, that's going to be even drive that number up even more. So device proliferation requires a lot of new policies. And not just, if you think of BYOD, one of the biggest benefits of BYOD that's overlooked at times is you can shift the asset acquisition costs to the employee, right? So it's allowing that employee to absorb whatever deal the carrier has, but it's allowing that employee to now purchase their device. So in a BYOD environment, and very few companies or organizations are 100% BYOD. You'll always find this kind of hybrid mixture. But in true BYOD, very little of the cost in managing a BYOD program is in hardware. But you've really got to highlight the importance of choosing the right governance and support models to control those costs. And what we're going to talk about next is the challenges that provides, or actually produces. We talked about business mobility being vital, but with all these winds and kind of forces coming together, it's really the perfect storm, right? So you got these devices that typically have never connected to the internet that are becoming the prevalent way. You've got the rise of operating systems that weren't built with the gold standard of security of what our corporate liable kind of BES and BlackBerry environment was. And now you layer on BYOD. And how many devices? 3, 4 that an employee, where's it going to end, right? So you've really got a challenge for IT departments that just didn't exist in the past. So you got to step back, and that's what our company did, and that's what my company did, is we said, there's some needs here that are, very challenging, that we're letting our customers go and kind of find this out on our own. We've got great relationships. Frankly, we didn't have any expertise in it either. So my team, Aris and about a dozen or so others, we became 2 years ago the guinea pigs at Sprint and said, we're going to immerse you. You become the subject matter experts. You learn all this stuff. And we've got to keep our sales teams focused on adding devices to the network, but we're going to overlay you, and you work with those sales teams to educate them. And a lot of this presentation that I've got here is really what we shared with our sales teams to help them understand that our customers have challenges and we want to help meet those needs. We want to help identify what they can do. So how many of you today in your organizations feel there's a level, because of this changing environment and all these new things, we're going to talk about a couple new ones, how many of you would admit that they're probably, like Sprint, lack some expertise inside the organization? A few nods. Okay, so that's fair. Maverick spending, do you think organizations have some folks that abuse their mobility privileges? I think we should have 100% hands go up there. Lack of automation. I'm going to share a few little dirty secrets. I've been to large corporations who will go unnamed, who manage their assets and their spending of wireless on Excel spreadsheets. And one person's doing it, and guess what? It isn't their real job. It's just they've got, they picked the short straw. So you've got lack of automation, lack of accurate inventory. Another little secret. Been to a company, sat, talked to the guy who had nothing, his responsibility. He was an engineer. He wasn't supposed to manage. This was a large company. He wasn't supposed to manage mobility, but he was put in charge of it. He didn't get his lunches anymore because he took his lunches to manage this. He pulled out a box of 200 phones that were all still active and hadn't been used for over a year. They were paying for that. So you can see, having control of your inventory and your spending and automation, and really, how many of you are faced with what we at Sprint are faced with, which is do more with less, okay? Budget cuts, more important needs that your workforce needs to be involved with. The last thing you want to do is heap on these growing challenges. So what does that mean? It means that we've got to identify these needs, then we've got to find the right partners or vendors or providers that can really help meet the needs that are growing. And this is, I like to call it a swim lane. You can kind of see those lanes. You also kind of moves along an axis of time, but you've got basic, just kind of mobilizing email, calendar, contacts with password, right? Kind of your basic security. And then you've got a little more security and control, and we're not just talking about BYOD here, we're talking about corporate liable as well, where you've got to take control of the device. This is company data, this is state data. You've got to have control and security of that information. And then, of course, as we referenced earlier, this growing use of mobile applications and content. There's applications that help run the business, business process, and content, file sharing that you guys want to allow your employees. All of this is kind of a step above email. And then, again, talking a little more on the whole platform, not just the device and the content on the device and the data, but you've got inventory and expense management. You got to make sure you get your arms around the whole big picture of it. And then if you do decide to have a BYOD policy, you've got that formal program, and we'll talk about some of those different solutions to that. So the next slide really is a slide that talks about how the industry has niches that grew from those needs. So if you look, this is kind of that same swim lane that we just looked at, how across the enterprise mobility space, a lot of vendors have seen the need and they've addressed the market needs. But we're talking about hundreds, and they're very incestuous. They cross boundaries. If you look at the secure email, when that came out, of course, you had Bez and you had Good and you had a lot of providers of that secure email need. And then you got into basic device management. People like who we partner with, ZenPrize and AirWatch, that put mobile device management client on the device itself. And then you have your pure play. I like to call them pure play. They got into the app management piece of it. So instead of having, all these, consumer application stores, like the Google App Store and the Apple Store, you had companies that built catalogs of apps, company specific or organization specific in state agencies, where you could say, hey, I'm building a catalog and these are the apps that you can use. And they actually, you get deep into it where they, there's companies like Aperion who ranks the apps in terms of their risk accessibility. And so you really can get and zero in and get focused upon that pure application management aspect. And then you got pure content management companies like Druva who will get with you and they'll get the forms that you need and they'll do the file sharing and and all of the different things that are more content management driven. Well, what happened is all of these companies said, hey, I don't want to just play in my niche. I want to do everything. So you found, Zenprise and AirWatch, all of a sudden, they weren't just device security, but they became app management and content provider, content management as well. And the content and app people, they, started working together. So right now, it is sort of confusing because you're talking to one company and you tell them, well, we're working with a content management program and we're working with these guys. And they're like, oh, well, we provide it for them. They get it from us. So you have all this different kind of ecosystem where there's a lot of mergers, acquisitions, a lot of sharing and white labeling. And it really becomes quite confusing. And what we call that is really MDM Plus, which is where today you see a lot of movement and a lot of engagement with MDM. It's not just securing the device, but it's the app management and content management. Now, that second to the last little building block right there, you've got MDM, which is really client license, it's software on the device. You're purchasing that. Who's going to manage it? Because they're selling you software. They're going to give you some tools, but you got to have resources inside your IT department. Who's going to be the one in your organization that takes that on, or in an enterprise organization? Do they have room to do that? Do you have the expertise to do that? So there's another industry out there that's management of MDM. I mean, they actually are outsourced to come in and run your MDM program or run your MDM, assets. And then the last one, again, talked about kind of that platform. It's telecom expense management. How many of you have heard the acronym TEM before? Okay, see, I live and breathe this, so I just assume. Telecom expense management are companies who will work with the carriers, and they'll literally, get an authorization from you that the carriers will give them your billing data on electronic, billing access, and they'll plug that billing data into their software, their platform, and it gives you a dashboard, and it gives you a multi-carrier look, right? So if you have multi-carriers, you've got all of that in one common platform. And they do that. They build a procurement portal so that, remember how we talked about kind of not using spreadsheets but automating? So they'll build you a procurement portal for your employees to order devices. The catalog will be just what's eligible, and it'll go to certain levels of approval, and they'll provide asset tracking so that you know who's got what device when. They'll even do first-tier help desk support. So there's a whole industry out there that basically is outsourced to do this for you and kind of bring you into that area where you can get your arms around it without devoting the resources and the expertise. So again, the message here is that pure play is really crossing boundaries, and it's becoming difficult to kind of sort out who's doing what. One slide, if I'd like you to really focus upon, and I kind of say, the basic premise of our time together, more than anything, this is your big get. I wish I could take credit for it, but it was a peer of mine that did this. BYOD, just by the acronym definition, is bring your own device. But I like this kind of meaning, this definition. To me, BYOD is finding a way to balance the employee wants with what the enterprise want and needs. Where that meets in the middle is really your BYOD policy. And employees want, and put yourself in as an employee or put yourself as managing employee, but for the most part, and there are exceptions, most people want a single device for personal and work use. They don't want to have to carry a personal corporate liable device and then their own personal phone. They'd like to have one phone to do it both. Would everybody agree with that? Is that, again, there are exceptions, but that's a basic premise that we're agreeing upon with BYOD. If that's not the case, then BYOD is not for your organization. You know, if corporate liable, separate phones, you can make it work. BYOD is not needed. Freedom to choose device and apps. Here's a big one. How many of you think that your employees are more productive when they're happy? Loaded question? Yeah. But seriously, many companies we've worked for, they will say, okay, you can have this phone, or this phone. But I don't want that phone. That's not the phone I want. Well, if you're going to have the company pay for it, you're going to use these phones. Why do companies do that? It's not for control. Why do you think they do that? That's a good standardization. Who said that? Yeah, it's less, you know, great, like you said, discounting price, but also the IT doesn't have to work as hard, right? You don't have to have as much manpower involved in that. So, you know, the freedom to choose devices works against what the enterprise wants. And the good user experience. I mean, that's what the employee really wants, right? He or she wants to just have a phone they like, that's cool, they can show it off. You know, they want a phone that they like. And everybody, you know, has different opinions of what that is in a personal taste. So what does the company want? What does the enterprise? What does the agency want? What does the state of California want? Employee productivity, right? You want to serve your constituents in the best and most efficient manner possible. And you have to do it because I imagine there's probably some laws that you guys have that you got to safeguard personal information and state data. Bless you. So the ability to manage and meet these requirements kind of flaunts in the face of what the employee wants. And it's all about, from the enterprise, managing and controlling costs. I don't think there's very few, states, cities, any type of public sector or business enterprise that would say that they need to manage and control costs. We all do. So that's a very, very important. And I think the BYOD dilemma in the next subsequent slides are going to try to help sort that out for you, or at least give you some idea. Does anybody have any questions so far? Yes, sir.
So you pointed out deploy, you broke out the app. Is the app included in terms of managing securing the data in that portion, or is that just not a consideration? That's fine.
Yes, and actually, I don't know if it's the next slide. It is the next slide. Thank you. This will help. I planted that guy here. I'll see you after the. So this is really, again, this is going to get a little deep. How many of you have heard the concept containerization? I have a hard time even pronouncing it. Okay, virtualization. Anybody heard of that one? Okay, you guys are smarter than me. And I did the happy smiley face, get a little lightheartedness here. But if you look at basic MDM, when basic MDM came out, the benefits were simple to deploy, broad device options. Android, iOS, you had a lot of devices that you could add client software to the device itself. Problem was you had basic security, so you had security around what you loaded on that device. But here was the big thing. You had a single persona not well suited for BYOD. Let me give you a great example, and this happened again. Talking to a lot of companies, you hear a lot of things, you're like, really? Does everybody understand what single persona means? It means that when they loaded that mobile device software on the device, it applied to everything on the device. So think about a BYOD environment where somebody owns their device, they've got their business needs, right? Securing the email, and company granted them access, maybe even put some applications on there, put some company data on there. And this is this employee that, you've got. Well, what happens when that employee does something bad and they say, you're out of here? What do you think the MDM software if they've applied that basic MDM software, what do you think the first thing the IT guy is going to do? IT guy or gal? Kill pill, right? Okay. Do you know there is a case, not lying, where somebody had a picture of their grandmother, the last picture on her 80th birthday, company wiped it. They're suing the company because there wasn't a good BYOD policy that depicted what should happen in a situation like this. So absolutely, you got to realize that basic MDM has easy to deploy, broad device options, basic security, and not well suited for BYOD. Now, corporate liable devices works great, right? Because that's the company's phone, that's the company's data. If they want to wipe it, have at it. Containerization really is trying to deliver, you know, it's like a management tool that carves out kind of an encrypted zone, or think of it as a policy bubble, right? And the policy is only applied to what's in the zone or what's in the bubble. Almost like an application level virtual private network. Okay? So it really gives that phone dual personas. Now, stronger security and broad device options. This containerization, if you see that evolving landscape and it gets a little lighter at the end, we're here today. Containerization is out there on the MDM Plus, you know, the AirWatch and Zen prizes that we partner with and other companies, that's there. So I don't want you to think that this is a future, but I will give you the caution, kind of the negative. Each needs modification because the pre-installed apps may not work in this containerized environment, right? The bubble where you've got a dual persona. Android is actually easier or better than Apple because what happens is you've got to have development, this modification, the binary code is needed. So you actually have to have somebody much smarter. That's why I said I'm not a solution engineer, but I do know that, you know, it's a limit to the applications. So you just can't use apps that are out there, and you have to actually, you know, like the Apple App Store, to get the binary code, you almost have to give up your firstborn. You know, you have to have some agreement with Apple that says, hey, you can bypass us and go to the actual developer of this code. As we know, Android's a little more open environment, so it's easier to get that. But just know that this containerization, in theory, sounds real good, but you need development, you need modification, so it does take some expertise to get that done. And virtualization, I won't stay on this too long. I'd only tell you that, you know, it's kind of a future, that, you know, it's technology that isn't generally available today. You know, it's dual persona, stronger security, and you can use any application, but there's limited device options, and really here's kind of the key is you have to have the device, and it's almost like you image it, like you've got two operating systems on the device. And the technology exists, but it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to shoot myself in the foot here. Remember a few years ago, 4G, WiMAX, and LTE? You know, it's like what's the community going to accept, and who's going to be the kind of emerged as the accepted? That's kind of what this virtualization is going on. There's several different ways that you can accomplish it, and until there's a consensus on the right technology, it's going to be out there as kind of a future. All right, we're getting to the close here. I know I got the 10-minute mark. I want to leave some time for questions, so I'll try to speak up. I won't be like Jim Valvano, who at the ESPY said, I don't care how much time is left, I'm going to talk as long as I want. Anybody see that video, ever see that? If you haven't, go Google Jim Valvano, ESPN ESPYs. It is worth the watch. I just want to talk quickly about the hybrid BYOD purchasing models. From company liable, which everybody knows corporate owns it, buys it, pays for it, to employee liable, which is the exact opposite. In between with BYOD, there's several different options. One is reimbursed. Reimburse and stipend are much alike. The only difference is reimburse is you kind of, maybe they might T&E it on their expense report. They pay for it and then they submit, like, here's my business calls, or here's the data that you said you'd pay for my data plan. So it's kind of a variable. You kind of get down to the exact, what are we going to reimburse? And the process of reimbursement is generally T&E. Stipend, on the other hand, just kind of flat rates it and says, okay, if you're a manager, you get $50. If you're a director, you get, 100. If you're like me and you're nobody, you get $10. So you just kind of have these different levels of stipend that then generally can either be applied, like we work with some companies where we apply it on the carrier's bill to the individual, or it could appear on their paycheck, that you would, but again, it's a stipend that you give a flat fee. Convenience fee, how many employees would like to pay, because a convenience fee is actually the reversal. The organization isn't paying the employee is paying back the organization. Can anybody think of an instance where that would be? Okay, let me give you one. If I give you a corporate liable phone, and I'm paying for that, and you want to use your tablet to access corporate email, I may choose to give that, but I'm going to be paying for MDM, right? I've got to secure the company data. There's a cost. Some companies might say, hey, look, if you want to use your own device, fine, but it's going to cost you $8 a month to do it. And we've seen that happen. So there's different policies that you set up around the purchasing and different administrative requirements. Okay, in closing, how many of you, when you walked in here today, essentially thought of BYOD as MDM software? Anybody? I saw a few heads shaking. But when we go out and we talk and sit down with the business unit owners of IT, and you look over there at IT, the IT person generally cares about securing the company data. So to them, MDM software is everything. That's what they're focused on. But today, what I wanted to leave you with, and really the purpose of having you attend this session, is BYOD is more than just MDM. It's about managing the BYOD platform. It's about an employee opt-in, right? We talked about the employee that didn't sign up for the policy and lost their grandmother's picture. You've got to build a portal. Let the employees enter that portal on your intranet, read the terms and conditions of the policy, and check off that they accept them. IL device procurement. How many of you know, and I know Mike here would love to advertise it, but I promise this wouldn't be a sales pitch, but how many of you know that you've actually got, and I've got 5 minutes, you've actually got a discount as an employee of the state of California for your personal IL phone? A discount that people who don't work for the state of California don't get if they just walked into a Sprint store. HR might find that as an employee benefit, especially if it's a good enough discount, which I know yours is. So why not, when they come into that portal, have some banners that advertise what the IL discounts are for the different carriers? Because we do an agnostic program. We know that we want to be the only carrier, but we know that we aren't. So again, that's part of BYOD management. Let's get with HR and highlight it. Again, that MDM software, but what did we talk about? What about managing the software? Who's going to manage the MDM software? BYOD reporting. Who's going to track? Are they going to use a spreadsheet? Who's got BYOD access? Or are you going to automate it? How are you going to manage the payments, whether it's reimbursement, stipend, or a convenience fee? And then we can even provide a tier 1 help desk. So when we go sit and talk with people about BYOD, it's about the HR, it's about legal, it's about the company payroll, and IT, because the cornerstone is obviously the MDM software, but there's much more to it. Hopefully, you guys and gals got the benefit of just some Again, not a sales pitchy presentation, but something that was informative. And thanks for attending.